Assalamu alaikum, this is Hussain Nadim from the Truth International, and today our topic of discussion is Western media's representation of Pakistan. For that reason, we have asked Dr. Hussain Nadim to join us in this discussion. Dr. Hussain, how are you?
Very well, thank you so much for inviting me.
डॉक्टर सबसे पहले तो आप इंट्रोड्यूस करवा देता हूँ अपना एकेडमिक बैकग्राउंड है आपका ऑक्सफोर्ड से बीए जॉर्ज वाशिंगटन यूनिवर्सिटी से बीए एमफिल आपका कैम्ब्रिज से PhD from University of Sydney, right? So, why did you leave those think tanks in the America? And you worked in the US think tanks, right? So why join IPRI?
This is one question जो I get asked a lot. I actually didn't join IPRI right away. I left Cambridge in 2011 when I was graduating, came back to Pakistan. I started teaching at NAST and also at Quaid-e-Azam University parallel. And I was working very closely with the government as well at that time. Why did I leave? I think it's very interesting when somebody asks me this question as a Pakistani, because nobody asks this question to an American, British, or anyone who has studied anywhere in the world. Okay, why are you leaving your country and going somewhere else? I think reason why I wanted to come back was because there was never a question of living over there. I was studying international affairs, security studies and all. And you also have to recognize that the generation you, I and everyone else over here in the room belong to is really, I was born in 87 and that was the end of the Afghan war first. And the 90s era, I was growing up as a young child in Lahore, and my father was in the military, so we traveled around Nowshera, Mangla and everywhere else. So first-hand experiences of how Pakistan was transforming during very uncertain times with very bad relations with the US, extremism seeping into the country, concerts being banned, etc., etc. And then 2001 happened while I was still very young, and it again changed the country and how we thought. Now, I say this thing that having lived in the US is a very large country with a very large entertainment setup, educational setup and all. So when they were engaged in 9/11, in the war on terror, Iraq war, while there was conversation in the US public about these things, the public was also had a lot of other things to do. Their life was not as much affected as things get affected in Pakistan when you are involved in a war. So as a country, when we were involved in a war on terror, I don't think there is any single family in the country that has not been affected one way or the other. People in my family were attacked. My friends' families were attacked. A lot of my friends in the military lost their lives and all. So each one of us has suffered. Schools being banned, shops being closed, cricket being literally terminating for Pakistan. So we've all been affected. So imagine then in 2006-7 when as young student I go to America and all, the mindset and I'm going with is because I want to learn what went wrong. So I wanted to study political science, IR, to be able to then come back to Pakistan and contribute in my own way. I didn't have any revolutionary ideas of changing the world, changing the country, but my interest was how do you contribute more? And then I had just did a very simple weighing of my options to see that will my degree from Cambridge, GW and elsewhere be more beneficial into the British environment or the American environment, or will it have more value and contribution in the Pakistani society? And I think the answer was very clear. And at a young age, when I was moving back 23, 24, I could take risks. I wanted to explore Pakistan. I wanted to understand things in a much better way. And most of us are kind of like emotional about Pakistan as well, where we are driven by, and this is one thing that I also want to put it on the record, that I don't think I've seen any other country in the world where you ask any young student or graduate what you want to do and they say that we want to serve Pakistan. Pakistan is the only country where kids say that. If I've taught at different universities around the world, if you ask students over there, it's mostly that I want to do this, I want to be a scientist, I want to do this and all. It's never really about the country. So you understand that the mindset we've evolved, coming back was the natural progression, I thought. And I think it also has to do a lot with my family values. My father was in the army, my Thai was in the police, my grandfather was in the government, his father was in the government, and I think his father was also in the government. So I'm more or less fourth to fifth generation. Yeah, so never really thought about working in the private sector. Had no interest in selling water or sugar drinks and all of that. It was just one thing, that whether it pays or not, the public sector and the public service was at the core of what I wanted to do. And here I am.
So you talked about revolutionary ideas. Recently आपने G5 और Internet of the Things उस पे काम शुरू किया था. It's been amazing, to be very honest. So how did you come up with that idea?
So that came from a very, very heartfelt understanding of how the change was happening in the society, triggered by digital technologies and overall advancement of social media. When I moved back from Sydney in late 2018, I realized one thing, that just how technology was changing everything else in the world. The business as usual was not happening. I mean, you're not using fax machines anymore, you're not using letters anymore, you're using emails. And people don't even use emails anymore, it's WhatsApp. I realized that the world around had changed, yet the research at universities and in public sector institutions was still the same. Nothing against the qualitative research, but if you're still relying on very specific qualitative research without looking at the big data or the quantitative side, I thought you were missing out on something. And then the second part was also that the digital world has emerged as a parallel reality to the real world. So, I mean, I'll give you one more example. We're living in two worlds right now. One is the physical world where we live, and the other is the digital world where we spend good 5-6 hours of our day. We engage, we interact, we make payments, we order food and all of that. Yet, we know so little about that digital world and how it impacts our real world, how the digital world is reshaping our mindset. I mean, I'll give you one example. I know so many smart people from 2011 and 2012 when digital media was very, 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 very tiny in the country. Very sane minds, having spent now 10 years on social media. You look at the language on social media and you don't believe that these are the same people. So my inquiry is, how is social media, this entire tribal networks that are there, how is that shaping human behavior? And out of that came the need to understand and develop this methodology and theoretical framework to come up with a new research, and that was G5IO. Through G5IO, we wanted to understand fake news, disinformation. We wanted to understand the changing human behavior, the changing society behavior. We also wanted to understand how different groups undertake platform manipulation to create false narratives, how that is now changing the core concepts of our society and philosophy. And I think Twitter is not the only one that is really shaping it. TikTok is even more powerful, and the way TikTok, and I can put it on record, and I've talked about this thing a lot in the government, that USAID has spent millions of dollars trying to provide gender empowerment and rural development programs in small towns and rural areas in Pakistan, yet they were not successful. It took one TikTok to liberate and empower a lot more women, young entrepreneurs from social media, who are now just making videos and earning a lot of money. So technology and social media is changing the world, yet our traditional state institutions are not prepared to regulate them. They're not prepared to understand them. They're not prepared to even do research on them. So G5IO came as a way to provide policy advisory to different arms of the state and to the general public, bringing awareness on how to look at the new digital forum through a new research lens.
And how certain narratives come into, being.
And how narratives are shaped. So we have like a lot of different components. Narrative is one part of it. Human behavior is the other part of it.
So about media is just part of their narrative, part of the business, part of their staff account. So how do you think media shapes perception and opinion? For instance, Iraq war में जब बुश एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन ने मीडिया का यूज करके एज अ टूल यूज किया था, और सद्दाम हुसैन और अल-कायदा ने एक नेक्सस बिल्ड किया था और एक इन्वेजन का एक प्रीटेक्स्ट था पब्लिक ओपिनियन. तो इसके बारे में आपका क्या?
So none of this is new. The dawn of human civilization, the day you started uttering the first few words, the narratives were there. And we tend to take narratives in a negative direction only, but narratives are very powerful tools that define human reality, human experience, and society as well. At the core of it, I'll give you one more example on this. At the core of it, if you look at the nations, the empires, and the individuals, these are the three layers, right? The individual, the substate, the actors, and then the national, the global society. Our global society right now, as we speak, is based on the Abrahamic tradition. the narrative, good versus bad. For every Nimrod, there is an Abraham. For every Pharaoh, there is a Musa. David versus Goliath. This, etc., etc. So we as humans, civilization right now is shaped by the Abrahamic tradition, right? What is that tradition? It's a master narrative, the meta narrative that defines us, through which comes, and even if you look at the atheists, they're also the part of the same narrative. Actually, they try to negate it, but they're not developing their own separate narrative on how the world was formed. They still are part of the same meta narrative. So the meta narrative is there. The empires, Alexander the Great, who called Alexander the Great great? Who termed him that? He himself. He carried around 100 historians with him throughout his expeditions that would flush out all the negative things and promote the Alexander as the savior of the mankind and all. So the master narrative of our human history, if you look at, it's Alexander the Great, it's Julius Caesar, Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Hazrat Isa, etc., etc. So these are narratives, these are stories. And you at the individual level are also a story. So when we die, what remains? Not the physical form, not the intellectual form either. It's the story that is left. So if you treat individuals, nations, empires, and our civilization as a narrative, you'll realize that our very existence paves the way for the narrative to be there. You're not in isolation of a narrative. The very existence you have is going to be defined by the narrative, what narrative you give to yourself and all. So narratives are very powerful. Now, how do they shape different realities, the politics and all? Those are very petty things, to be very honest. Using narrative, manipulating a narrative to wage a war over here, using a narrative to discredit one political leader or do this or that. These are, I think, the abuse of using narratives, because the narratives, for instance, the religious narratives or the inspirational narratives, what do is they inspire human growth. There was a narrative that we need to go on the moon, to land on the moon. The narrative became a reality. I'm going to end this over this one point that, and it's a very powerful book on narratives by Charlotte Epstein, The Power Discourses. She worked on the Whaling Discourses in Australia. And she writes very interesting thing that powerful words create powerful narratives. Powerful words create powerful narratives that shape powerful realities. So the words shape narratives, the narratives shape your reality. If I keep telling you you're stupid for the next 5-6 days, 7th day you'll probably feel very stupid. If I do the other thing that you're the smartest man in the country and all of that, you'll feel a lot more confident in that. There's a lot of interesting research done on that by Bruce Whites, or I'm probably getting the name wrong, I usually do that, but the guy wrote Biology of the Belief and how your cells actually operate at the subconscious level in a way where they react to the environment. So if you start saying good things to the cell at the cellular level, the cells start growing. If you put cell under a lot of stress, the cell starts degenerating. And it's the exact same thing with the country, with an individual, and with our civilization as well.
Yes. So,
sorry for this, too much jargon and all of that.
पाकिस्तान के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में अगर हम बात करते हैं तो पाकिस्तान में भी डिफरेंट नैरेटिव्स इमर्ज हो रहे हैं जो मोस्टली वेस्ट में कॉइन किए गए, जिसमें लेबल्स आते हैं फेल्ड स्टेट के, डेक्सन स्टेट, फोर्टिफाइड स्टेट, डेंजरस स्टेट, लाइक पॉलिटिकल कमेंटेटर निकालते हैं. तो कौन इनके इंडिकेटर्स कौन सेट करता है, स्टैंडर्ड्स कौन सेट करता है, किस तरह मेजर कर सकते हैं कि ये फेल्ड स्टेट है, ये फेल्ड स्टेट नहीं है?
There is a phrase that goes by that history is written by the victorious, right? It's considered as a given. We accept it as a part of belief that history is written by the victorious, but I actually don't entirely agree to that. Yes, in certain cases it does. In many cases it doesn't. Karbala, for instance, is a classic example. Othello is a classic Greek tragedy, is entirely about the loser, the glorification of the person who died, the betrayal and all of that. Jesus Christ. So the losing side wins. So you don't really have to be a winner to create your story. Exactly. So to come to your point on who sets the narrative and all, we give too much agency to the international actors and the powerful actors, that, oh, they shape the story. That's not true entirely. Story is shaped as part of a bargain, as a part of a discursive struggle between different forces. Much of Pakistan's story has been shaped less by the Americans and their need to push the narrative, and more by our absence of narrative. I hope I make sense.
Counter-narrative.
I'm not talking about the counter narrative, and I don't want to use the word counter narrative, because when you talk about the counter narrative, it means that you're responding in reaction to a narrative. If you're part of the counter narrative, you can never be free from the narrative, the master narrative, alternate narrative. What was our narrative? I'll give you one example. For 20 years, we were part of the war on terror. What was our narrative? There was none. For the last 70 years of this state, what is our narrative on the foreign policy? None. So I would not blame the foreign powers or the bigger powers or the Americans that, oh, they shaped the narratives, they called us a terrorist and all. They're giving to us their own reality. The problem is that the vacuum that existed, there was no narrative of your own. Hence, whatever the Americans were writing, whatever the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the American academics were talking, writing and defining Pakistan, that was being taught right here at NUST, NDU, LUMS and etc. And your entire generation was reading about how Pakistan army has been playing a double game and how they have funded jihad. Nonsense.
Musharraf lies, that was the title of our New York Times article.
We've done a lot wrong, but not probably in Afghanistan. I would say we've done a lot. Much of our policy in Afghanistan was out of a very noble narrative that the continuation of a military warfare and military presence was not the option. So the point I'm trying to make, rather again, I'm going to recap, is that we are a victim of our own lack of narrative. And part of the reason why that was there is because we were struggling between a dictatorship and a democracy. So if you look at the data on General Musharraf's era, much of the narrative that Pakistan army is playing a double game was not set by the Americans. It was set by a particular political party in Pakistan that was writing articles in The Guardian, that was going around lobbying in Washington, D.C., telling their senators that, look, you're trusting the wrong ally. Musharraf is not an ally. Musharraf is backstabbing you. He is playing you, like the words exactly used in the articles, that he's playing you like a fiddle, that he's providing support on one end and he's using Taliban to attack you on the other end. So all narratives about you as an individual, about you as a nation, are all internal. If there is an absence of your narrative, either an absence or is there a corruption of your narrative within the society, where half of the people think that Pakistan should not be made or Pakistan should do this and that, which aligns with the narrative of the foreign powers or the adversary states, you really don't have a narrative. You've already lost the game. And remember one thing, when you've lost at the narrative war, you basically, the rest, everything is just a formality.
So don't you think that जो lack of narrative है वो academics का ignorance है इसका, like हम deconstruct नहीं करते जो western narrative है उसको. पाकिस्तान में सिर्फ एक किताब है जो जिसने deconstruct की है, वो constructing knowledge production, constructing Pakistan through knowledge production by Decolonizing. उसके अलावा Google Scholar रिसर्च कर रहे हैं, ग्राफ में रिसर्च कर रहे हैं, जिसमें भी डेटाबेस पे कोई इस तरह की किताब या रिसर्च हो.
पोस्ट कॉलोनियल स्टडीज़ में पाकिस्तान में काम बहुत कम है, और जो था वो पुराना है, वो उर्दू लैंग्वेज में मोस्टली है. I will not blame the academics alone on this thing. Yes, on some part I do blame the academics. Part of the reason is because, as Sayyid Hussain says, that your intellectual is a fifth-rate intellectual who's more concerned about the rights movements in New York than he's concerned about his own backyard and the farmers and the poor people over here. So we're so disconnected, and our academia is so disconnected from our own reality outside of Islamabad and Pindi and Lahore, that it's more, I mean, I think there is an economy to it as well, because the political economy of research grants is mostly defined by what the donors want, right? So the donor wants you to write on Balochistan, or the donor wants you to write on specific ABCD issue. That's their priority. So sure, there's a work that needs to be done over there. You do that. But what about the 50 things that are not the priority of the donors, which are your core priorities? So you're not investing in that. So the academics really don't have an option. One, fundamentally, most of the PhD scholars that you have are from the US and the UK. What are they studying in IR? Let me break it down to you. Hobbes, Clausewitz, Yang Rousseau, etc., right? The problem is Hobbes and much of these other scholars, Clausewitz, are 15th, 16th century mid-European theorists that defined their theories based on the European history. That was the data that they use. The problem is, we're trying to use 16th century theories, force them into Pakistan and try to create a picture, and then we wonder why doesn't any theory work in Pakistan? Because you're using an inorganic, artificial and outside theoretical framework to define your reality. And when you do that, you're defining yourself in a Clausewitzian and Hobbesian world. I don't personally believe that we live in a Hobbesian world where there is a zero-sum game and everyone is that's their problem back in their days when there was scarcity of food and resources. We don't live in the same era yet, because you've taught people that, because you framed your entire institutional structures and your entire war departments, the entire power structures and the political play based on those theoretical models. When you get into them, what do? You start behaving in a Hobbesian world. Hence, we are not, people say कि जी हम 1990 से बाहर नहीं निकले. My argument is that we have not gotten out of the 17th century, where the resources were defining the theoretical frameworks, and our resources are in very different tangents. And हमारी local अगर आप theories देखें, we sit in a seat right now, we are sitting on Margala, and a lot of people probably don't realize that this is one of the most important seats of the Buddhist capital. This entire region, the Gandhara where we are, Margala Hills, the Taxila and all, this was one of the largest empires in India, where the Buddhist Chandragupta Maurya, the great Chanakya, and these people lived, thrived and all. So where is the history of those people? Where is the data from that? Where is the data of the Mughals? Where is the data of that? If we have the data of them, and because that data is based on our DNA, based on our experiences, our land, our rivers, our wars, how we fought the Alexander and etc. When you take the data out of that, extrapolate and develop a theoretical framework, that is the reality that is going to define you. And the funny part is you'll realize that our idea of war, our idea of coexistence, our idea of living in a society is much more advanced, was always more advanced, because we were in early civilization. Yet colonization happened and we were told that, oh, your knowledge is not a knowledge, that is not scientific enough. The scientific knowledge is basically the one that is done by the Western countries. Here comes the problem of the post-colonial states. And we've accepted, our academia has embraced that, accepted that because we want a fellowship in the US, we want to get a research grant. Like again, I said, I don't want to blame the academics, it's not their fault. It's the lack of the government's will to develop its own theoretical models, develop the research grants to the social science community so they can actually develop an original organic thought. In the absence of that, I grade papers and policy papers will start off with, when Clausewitz in 1536 wrote about this, and I lose interest right away because Clausewitz is not relevant anymore in Pakistan, neither is Hobbes.
So, अब मैं दूसरी तरफ आता हूँ कि जो वेस्टर्न मीडिया में पाकिस्तान की रिपोर्टिंग होती है वो बहुत ही कंटेक्चुअलाइज्ड होती है. Like for instance, पाकिस्तान की colonial history है, उसको मेंशन नहीं किया जाता. पाकिस्तान की dictatorships रही है, political instability रही है, लेकिन वो political instability किस वजह से रही है उसको मेंशन नहीं किया जाता. Like US ने अपने गोल्ड वार इंटरेस्ट के लिए पाकिस्तान की dictatorships को सपोर्ट किया था. तब फॉरम में रही है जब dictatorships, right? So इसकी एब्सेंस जो है वो भी एक नेगेटिव जनरेट कर रही है, परसेप्शन जनरेट करके इसके ऊपर आपका क्या?
देखिए, again, those countries are going to try to do what they're going to try to do. And let me state it on the record, Pakistan is an important country for them, but it is not so important that they're going to sit and talk about you all the time, right? Which basically, the reason why I'm saying that is not to demean Pakistan. It's an important country globally, whether the Americans like to say it or not, or the Western powers want to say or not. A 220 million country, 65% youth, a nuclear weapon, very strong, robust market, etc., it's bound to be a very powerful country. So there is that level. So the importance is there. But it is not that important. They're going to try to start like, think about you and this and that all the time and build narratives and all. Like again, I said, much of the narratives that the US has on Pakistan is not their own artificially created narratives. It is the narratives that you people, us, have given them. What are we offering them as a narrative? I mean, if the narrative is that Osama bin Laden was discovered from here, if the narrative is that every single Al-Qaeda leader was caught in Karachi and Faisalabad, etc., if the narrative is that we are only the security provider to you and rest nothing else, despite the fact that we are producing one of the best computer scientists and the data scientists from FAST, NAS, LUMS, etc. So the narrative is shaped by us. It is what we want to show. But if we want to provide the world community strictly security services in the absence of rest everything else, that's the only narrative. You can't really blame them. Somebody sitting in New York or Wyoming, you can't really expect them to just go and come to Pakistan and explore Pakistan. This is one of the shocking things that happened when any foreign traveler come to Pakistan and they realize, oh, Pakistan is such a diverse country. Like, what were you expecting? I mean, because they've seen media so much, and the media is representing your version of reality. Half of the time you're telling the media, oh, look, things are so bad, things are so bad. Where is your own projection arm? Where is your own narrative space? Yes, attacks happen all over the world. अमेरिका में हर रोज़ गन वायलेंस होता है. इसका क्या मतलब है कि अमेरिका में सिर्फ न्यूज़ गन वायलेंस की है? वहाँ पे कॉन्सर्ट भी हो रहे हैं, वहाँ पे भी रहे. The worst thing you did was structurally one by one, and it was a failure of the government's policies. You closed down all narrative making avenues and machines in Pakistan. I'll give you one small example of this. When I was growing up in Lahore, and I'm from Lahore, there was 2 months or 3 months of season which was nothing else but kites. Basant. Yes. And the Basant in Lahore was, I'm not sure if anyone of you are from Lahore, Basant in Lahore was a global event. You would go on any अंदरून की किसी भी छत पे आप जाएं, the kites were everywhere. It was the most beautiful sight. Indian actors, Amitabh Bachchan, Shah Rukh Khan's, ABCD, global celebrities, they would come down to Lahore, hotels packed, haveliyan packed, and that was the narrative that would take you back. It was a massive event coming from hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of years से आपका चलता हुआ आ रहा था. तो बम पर फटे नहीं आपके. आपने टेररिस्ट के लिए जो सबसे बड़ा रहम किया ना, वो ये किया that you gave up your way of life for them. You shut down Basant because of stupid reasons, because you couldn't regulate the door and all of that. आपने कहा यार हम डोर तो नहीं रेगुलेट कर सकते, हम बंद ही कर देते हैं. $1 billion इंडस्ट्री बंद, बट उससे भी ज़्यादा बड़ी प्रॉब्लम क्या है? नैरेटिव बंद. आज आप अंदाज़ा लगाएं, बसंत का महीना हो आपका, सोशल मीडिया पे बसंत के अलावा कोई और चीज़ चलेगी? सवाल ही नहीं पैदा होता.
ये सब तो ठीक है कि पाकिस्तान में इंस्टीट्यूशनल मसले हैं, गवर्नमेंट के लैक ऑफ अटेंशन है, लैक ऑफ पॉलिसी थी, ऑब्वियसली एज यू मेंशन लैक ऑफ नैरेटिव था. लेकिन जब हम वेस्टर्न मीडिया को देखते हैं तो हमारे भी रिसेंट इमरान खान जो एक्स प्राइम मिनिस्टर थे वो रशिया गए थे. जिस दिन वो रशिया गए थे उस दिन रशिया ने इन्वेजन करी थी यूक्रेन में, लेकिन उसको किसी और तरह से रिपोर्ट किया जाता है, वेस्टर्न को नेगेटिव पोर्ट्रेल दिया जाता है. लेकिन जब हम इजराइल को देखते हैं या ताइवान को देखते हैं, नैंसी पेलोसी सेक्रेटरी स्टेट, तो उसको बहुत डिफरेंटली पोर्ट्रेट किया जाता है. तो ये जो डबल स्टैंडर्ड है,
देखिए the discrimination and racism in academia, in media, in politics, in policy, it is prevalent. There is no question about it. Just because somebody say that we've now decolonized, or हमने decolonization कर ली है, या somebody says that yeah we have like diversity and we have like a brown face representing on BBC, means nothing. The racism, the discrimination, international media, how they frame individuals that they don't like, how they frame nations that don't adhere to their standards, that the people that have a different belief set, the way they present them, there is a discrimination, that there is no denial. And after 9/11 it just came out on the surface too much. हमेशा से थी, 9/11 के बाद robustly expose हो गई. सोशल मीडिया के बाद और ज़्यादा एक्सपोज हो गई, बिकॉज सोशल मीडिया नाउ गेव एवरीवन ए माउथ, which basically means that the racism from foreign journalists, I mean, you look at any book, I won't name the author, but there is a very interesting book on Pakistan's ISI, but one of the most famous foreign authors, one of the very, very good academics. Yet when you read through those chapters, and I wrote this about in my book, I quoted it in my book, you'll realize that the way they frame, consciously or unconsciously, the ISI officers, they talked about, the academic talked about General Mahmood, and the words he used was that a whiskey sipping journal with flats in London and children studying in Ivy Leagues on one end, this, and on the other hand supporting Taliban and all of that, and extremists and terrorists. Here was the depiction of a Pakistani ISI chief. On the other hand, 2 pages later, the depiction of Kofar Black, CIA's counterterrorism czar since 9/11. He was a family man, loved by his colleagues and loved by his children and all of that. Right out of the Oliver Twist movie. Point I'm trying to make is they humanize their characters. Our characters are dehumanized. They're savages, and that is what the portrayal is. Whether we like it or not, that is how they're going to portray us. So you're asking me whether there is a discrimination or not. There is not just discrimination. I will go on to say there is racism, and it is so prevalent and deep that despite of the affirmative actions, despite of this whole post-colonization and the move back to liberalization, within those labels of liberalization, if you don't look, I mean, they would ideally want someone who looks like them, who looks like a native, talks like them and thinks like them. And that is where the real problem starts in, because the depiction of then the Gaza crisis to Kashmir, there is a difference in that. Kashmir doesn't really ring the bell because they need India right now. Which is fine, by the way. I'm not complaining about it. That is there. Maybe we would have done the same thing if we were on that level. And probably we do it at our own level as well in many ways. Within this country, you look at how we treat different provinces and people, I think it's also very, very clear. So I'm not going to really blame them for that. The point I'm going to take away from this is that it's a prevalent part of the configuration where the world is right now. What are we going to do about it? Do we have the powerful narrative to tell our own reality, or half of our people actually think that no, we are better off as savages, हम लोग तो कौमी जाहिल हैं, the narrative that comes around.
जी, ये narrative भी है पाकिस्तान से.
इधर से यही narrative चलता है, कौमी जाहिल है आपकी, which I absolutely deplore, because this is a very elitist narrative, comes from those people who
are in a position of power.
Are in a position, the people who are actually the reason why Pakistan is in a mess, and yet they have the audacity to blame the aam admi over here कि यार ये लोग जाहिल हैं. The reason why this country is a mess right now, you'll be very surprised, has very, very little to do with the illiterate and the poor. The seemingly rot of the society has nothing to do with the situation. It's those in the power that have brought this situation. This most of the educated. Now, it's just not in Pakistan. If you look at the Iraq War was not lost or conceived in Pentagon. It was conceived in the Harvards and the Yales, and I don't want to name the scholars that supported the Iraq War. I don't want to name the scholars that supported the war on terror. I don't want to name the scholars that have supported one of the most ugliest Libyan war in Libya, etc., etc. What we really care.
और उसमें भी लिबिया में बहुत जो है उसमें भी R2P बहुत था जो यूएन का डॉक्ट्राइन है. I mean यूएन के प्लेटफॉर्म से ही वो इन्वेजन illegal. So
these forums are also part of the neo-colonial state structures, where they provide a semblance of order and semblance of justice so that the countries don't revolt. Really, just to keep you a lollipop and put you on the side.
So we have identified the problem. how can we solve it? And how can we decolonize the knowledge?
I think I already mentioned about that unless and until you do not invest in collecting your own data, the local data of your human experiences, your history, your religion, your thoughts, your philosophy. Once you have that data, then you need theorists to theorize on top of that to create a new world order which is beyond a zero sum game, which is beyond a Hobbesian world, which is beyond this nation state nonsensical ideas. I mean, sure, nation state we are living in, but the nation state is already a collapsed idea. It's not going to work. It came out of the Westphalian order in a particular time and an order. The world, the countries that actually absorbed it may be fine, but for a country like Pakistan, developing a nation state out of it and then going gung-ho about it, it's never going to work. So you need a new vision. For the new vision to happen, you need a very, very new data. You can't rely on the data from the European world and try to transplant their exact democracy in this country, their exact human rights, ethics, ethos over here. You need your own definitions of human rights, because we need a very rigorous definition of human rights where we are. You need a very rigorous definition of women rights. What it stands, it must be 10 steps ahead of what they are offering. You need a very different set of constitutional rights and the social contract. Till you're not able to do that, and that's an intellectual exercise, and that intellectual exercise nobody has time to do, because who gives a shit about it? So we're lacking public intellectuals, because half of our public intellectuals are now working for donors and providing consultancy services to them. How can they follow their own agenda?
Yes, exactly.
My friends working in the donor circles hate me for that, but it's the truth. If you are taking money from a donor organization, I'm not saying it's wrong or right. I'm just saying that you have different priorities.
You have to follow their agenda.